In Resident Evil, you are given the option of playing as either Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield. This raises a pressing and hitherto unanswered question about the storyline of the game. That is, which of the two sets of events actually happened? It's impossible for both heroes to have entered the mansion and performed their games at the same time. Firstly, and most obviously, the character you don't choose to play as is found in a prison cell towards the end of the game. They state that they had been kept in there from the word go. Secondly, the nature of some of the puzzles indicates that both parties simply cannot have been present. The shotgun in the room on the second floor is collected by both characters. Barry would not have been able to use the flamethrower against Plant 42 if Chris had similarly collected it to use against the Black Tiger. Dr. Sullivan would only have one copy of the videotape detailing his death, but the player can view the tape as either Chris or Jill at the end of the game. There's no feat of cognitive dissonance powerful enough to imagine a scenario where Wesker, Chris, Jill, Barry, and Rebecca all cohabitate the mansion at the same time without running into each other at least once or accidentally interfering with the other party's progress. One would think that, of all the resources available to us, the S.T. Perry novelization of the game would permit a scenario wherein both player character scenarios happen at the same time. Unfortunately, even that falls flat, with the two teams running around the opposite ends of the manor, and the author having to invent characters and exposition from whole cloth to cover for the notes that Party A had already collected by the time Party B arrived. It has been stated that the 5 previously mentioned characters survived the mansion incident, but that is impossible. Barry is implied to die in Chris's scenario, and Rebecca never even appears in Jill's. One could say, well, obviously Jill's scenario is the correct one then, because Miss Chambers never appears in the series again, whereas Wesker, Barry, and Chris do. And up until 2015, that's correct. But Rebecca is a critical character in Biohazard the Stage, which is one of the prequels to Resident Evil 6, and she's a main character in the confirmed to be canon third Resident Evil CGI movie. This puts her death or disappearance into an uncertain state. However, I have a theory as to the proper canonical explanation for all 5 characters surviving, but to properly conceptualize it, I need to define some terms that you may or may not already know. The first of these is the sliding scale of canon. Basically, there are 3 points on this scale: canon, semi-canon, and non-canon. Canon is exactly that. It's a plot point that is stated in one resource that is also proven to be correct in another. Jill's a woman, Chris is a man, their genders never change from game to game or game to movie, so we can say this is canon. STARS exists and investigated a group of murders in 1998. This is true because it was stated in the first game, then backed up in 2, 3, and 4. So canon is basically some intrinsic part of the game's universe that has been both stated and proved to be the truth. Semi-canon is the halfway point. There is an event or statement that has been shown but not acknowledged by another entry in the series or by the creator. What happened to Billy, Shiva, or Helena? They were part of the adventures in their respective games, but no source to confirm what happens after their games occurred, so any speculation on their fate is semi-canon. Did the events of Outbreak actually happen? We don't know because Outbreak isn't referred again to in the series, but we as players experience those scenarios. Thus, semi-canon. Finally, non-canon is a situation that happened in a game that didn't actually happen. It sounds like doublethink, but it's actually a thing. For example, consider the worst ending of Resident Evil. Your partner and sidekick are both dead, and the mansion doesn't explode. This obviously does not happen. It may have occurred for you, but in the storyline of the series as a whole, Chris/Jill and Barry/Rebecca were on the helicopter on the morning of the 25th, and the Spencer estate fucking exploded. That, we know, is what happened, because later entries say it is what happened. Another example of non-canon is the 4th term that needs definition, the Gaiden scenario. This is a very common thing in Japanese media that doesn't really happen a lot in Western series. Essentially, a Gaiden scenario is taking similar characters or events and remixing them with new plot twists and complications. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City just plain old did not happen, because one of the potential outcomes of the game is the death of Leon Kennedy just after his arrival in town. This cannot have occurred, because that would mean that 1/2 of 2 never happened, all of 4 never happened, the plot point of Leon's involvement in Code Veronica didn't happen, and 1/4 of 6 never happened. Another example is the live-action films. They're not related at all to the games other than lifting the names and part of the personalities of a handful of characters. Therefore, non-canon can be considered a thing that could have happened in a different story, but didn't actually happen in this one. All that being said, let's investigate Resident Evil's story. There's 2 scenarios, Chris's and Jill's, and you, the player, can play either one. I would propose that Jill's scenario is the one that actually happened, and Chris's scenario is a Gaiden scenario to Jill's. Why would I say that? Well, let's review the evidence in favor of Jill's scenario. Firstly, and most importantly, is the survival of Barry Burton. Burton was a part of the events of 1, 3, and Revelations 2. He was also mentioned in 2 and 5, which is 5 games wherein he had an impact. Therefore, he must have lived through the mansion incident. But what if he only survived the Spencer estate and didn't actually interact with Jill, escaping some other way? For that, we turn to 2 lines of dialogue from Revelations 2. In the first Claire section, she jokes,
"Yeah, I was almost a Claire sandwich."
To which Moira asks in exasperation,
Does Barry tell everyone that story?
Ergo, it can be deduced from this that Jill had to have been rescued from the ceiling trap by Barry, a trap that is never escaped from by Chris.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Also, Barry couldn't reasonably have told Claire the story directly. While Claire and Moira work for TerraSave and Chris works for the BSAA, making it reasonable for them to interact, to say nothing of the fact that Claire and Chris are related. Barry is either freelance or retired as of 2011, making it difficult to imagine that he and Claire interacted in such a casual way as to have him tell her that story. Furthermore, Barry had to have survived the mansion incident to tell Chris that story, who would then tell Claire, which means Chris also had to live. In Barry's first chapter of the same game, he busts down a large gate and declares,
Who's the master of unlocking now, huh?
Again, the master of unlocking quip only happened when Barry gave Jill the lockpick in the main hall, which does not happen in Chris's game.
Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
Therefore, it is safe to say that Barry, Chris, and Jill all lived through the mansion incident, with Jill and Barry interacting all the way through. In other words, Jill's scenario. Secondly, let us turn our attention to the troublesome Mrs. Chambers. In Resident Evil 0, we know some things to be absolute facts because we saw them happen. These facts are as follows. Number 1. Billy and Rebecca both lived through their fight with the Leech Queen. Number 2. The two of them had to have at least one Magnum between them. Furthermore, you can clearly see the Magnum was fully loaded before firing the shot that killed the Queen, so they have exactly 5 rounds left in it. Number 3. There is no guarantee that the Magnum picked up in the loading bay is the only item they have on hand. Most players, that is to say players not doing some sort of challenge run like knife only or pistol only, will have brought their most powerful weapons into the fight with them. So we can safely assume that between the two characters there is at least one pistol, a shotgun or two, a grenade launcher, and an extra Magnum, all with respective ammo. Depending on how well they did with the Queen, they would also have healing items as well. It's unreasonable to expect the two of them to have emptied their pockets after killing the Queen. There's unintelligent actions, and there's downright insanity. The two of them knew they were going back into a forest filled with monsters that had killed their fair share of military, police, and STARS officers, so it would be safe to say that Cohen and Chambers were packing heat. Subpoint to this, while one cannot see these weapons and items on their character models in the final cutscene, that gives no indication that the items were not there. Gameplay and cutscene segregation being what it is, Rebecca and Billy are never shown with their gear at any point in the game, yet they still have it. Finally, point 4, Rebecca only states her intention of going to the mansion.
That must be the old mansion that Enrico was talking about.
We are never shown her arrival or entry into the estate in a canon cutscene. Yes, she arrives at the house in Umbrella Chronicles, but the retelling of the canon games in that context is, yet again, Gaiden. Now we know that Rebecca made it back to Raccoon City to at least give a report on the events of Zero as shown in the 64 remake of Resident Evil 2. So what chain of events could have gotten her from the clifftop overlooking the mansion back to the city? This is where the theory comes into play. Rebecca, armed to the teeth, begins to make her way through the woods and towards the mansion. However, a combination of exhaustion on her part and massive enemy resistance centered on the mansion makes her abandon that plan, and she makes her way back down the mountains towards the city. Either she is too far away from the Bravo helicopter by nightfall to be seen by Alpha, or she is too deep into the tree cover to signal Alpha as they fly by. Knowing that she is now being searched for, Rebecca does one of two things. She either makes her way back to town on foot, or she gets to a clear area and radios Brad for pickup after the Alphas have already infiltrated the mansion. Regardless, she rendezvous with STARS and is debriefed at their headquarters, giving her report on the training facility incident. Sometime in the next few months, when things get really hot, She either resigns from STARS and leaves the city, or is evacuated. After Raccoon City is destroyed, she goes off to do her own thing, eventually joining the BSA and re-entering the plot as an undercover agent at Philosophy University in Australia. Unless Rebecca herself counters this theory in Vendetta, I believe it to be very solid in explaining the discrepancies in the plot.